Welcome and thank you for tuning in. You're listening to the Beyond 50 radio program. I'm Daniel Davis. Following our program, as many of you have over the last dozen or so years, you've realized that one of the aspects we like to share with people is the possibility of being able to find yourself in balance and certainly at peace with who you are. Being able to move forward with your next step in midlife and beyond is being able to do that confidently, knowing that you're purely making the decisions that you would like to make that are in your best interest, not only for your personal growth and development, but that for your spirit as well. How would you like to be able to transform stress, relieve burnout, reduce pain, optimize health, and improve relationships? I think that's something all of us would like to do. Joining us here on the program today is author of the book, The Heart and Science of Yoga. It's an empowering self-care program for a happy, healthy, joyful life. I'd like to welcome to the Beyond 50 radio program today our guest, Leonard Perlmutter. Leonard, thank you for joining us here on the program today.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for the invitation, Daniel.
Now, this book really surprised me because we've covered yoga a lot on this program. And generally what you see is a book with a lot of poses, talking about chakras, things like that. But this seemed to be more of a, the best way I could describe it, a dictionary, if you will. And what I was really enjoying about what I have read so far is how you can bounce around from the different chapters, and it almost becomes that sort of reference, if you will, that you can go into your day, and whether it's at the end of the day or the beginning, you can sort of open up anywhere and feel inspiration in a way to say, I'd like to find a way that I can apply this to my life today, because you can almost feel that somehow you're going to just feel better already. Tell us how you came to put all this together.
I put this together through personal study and experimentation. I've always been a philosophically oriented person, and I've also been a very practically oriented person. Unless what I've learned has a practical application, I really don't hold on to it. So when I was a child, I was in the Cub Scouts, and then as a teenager, I was in the Boy Scouts. And of course, we all remember that the motto of the Scouts is be prepared. And be prepared for what? Well, be prepared for whatever situation life will bring to us. And in the early 60s and into the 70s, I began searching for the meaning of life. I began searching for true happiness and better health. And I discovered yoga science. And to me, yoga science was like a scout handbook that presented different principles and practices, and it offered a hypothesis. The hypothesis was, if you want to be happy, if you want to be healthy, if you want to be secure and experience loving, nurturing, creative relationships that give rich meaning to life, all you have to do is A, B, C, D. And I started practicing these different principles and practices, and I felt better. I felt better physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually. I felt more energy. I felt like I was more creative, and that motivated me to consider every single relationship a means for my happiness and my health and my security. That's what yoga does. Yoga, the definition of yoga means union. In English, it means union. And yoga science is the oldest form of mind-body medicine on the planet. And what it states is that in order to experience happiness and health and security, it provides all of us a template. It's a scientific template for seeking and discovering the truth. But in order to begin the practice, we first have to be willing to turn our entire mind-body-sense complex into our own personal laboratory, within which to undertake scientific experiments, if you will. And for that experimental process, we are gifted what might be termed the bridge of yoga. The bridge of yoga is simply a metaphoric bridge that inspires every human being to base our thoughts and our words and our actions, which all bring about consequences, them on our own inner wisdom. And the promise of this hypothesis is that if we can use this bridge to base our outer actions on our own inner wisdom, the consequence will enable us to fulfill the purpose of our lives without pain, without misery, and without bondage. But the corollary of that, Daniel, is just as important, and that is that if we don't have a philosophy of life, no matter what you call it, I happen to call it yoga, but you can call it anything you want. If you don't have a philosophy of life that encourages you to base your outer action on your inner wisdom, what happens is human being sort of goes on autopilot, and the unconscious software of the mind, which is 1,000,000 times more powerful than good intentions, begins to operate and really manipulate us. I'm talking about fear, I'm talking about anger, I'm talking about selfish desires. And when we think, speak, and act in ways that conflict with our inner wisdom, that inner conflict becomes the mother of all problems. And instead of experiencing happiness and health and security, we experience physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual dis-ease or pain. I myself have an allergy to pain. I always have. And that's why I was drawn to yoga science, because it is a prescription for transforming the pain, stress in our lives into strength and creativity and healthfulness.
You know, it's I'll put it simply here. What I like about the consistency of what you have here in the heart and science of yoga is that people see on a very regular, consistent basis that there is a choice in every moment, in every step, in every action, every thought, all of it. And you put that into two words that I'd like you to elaborate on each of them a little bit to give our audience a feel of what they mean. The first one is what is known as the Shriya, and then there is the Praya. Okay, let's talk about what each of those are. So as I think our listeners hear this, they're going to realize, oh, wow, okay, I think I'm starting to get this now.
Well, every relationship, Daniel, every relationship means one thing. It means that I have to take an action. And for every action, we learned this in 4th or 5th grade in science class, Newton's third law of motion. For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. So every time we think a thought, speak a word, and take a physical action, a consequence develops that can lead in one direction or another. Well, I think that we all have a direction in mind that we would like. We want to be happy. We want to be healthy. We want to be secure. We want loving, nurturing relationships. And so the most powerful resource that we have to get to point B from point A are our thoughts. And as you mentioned, there are essentially two forms of thought. The first is called the Praya. Now, the Praya is some form of an ego or sense gratification that provides a short-term passing pleasure, but eventually brings about some form of pain. And the Praya is pleasant, it's comfortable, it's familiar, it's attractive. It's really the ground upon which the personality stands today. The Praya might be represented by anger. It could be fear. It could be the second jelly donut, a desire for a second jelly donut. Okay? And when we serve the Praya, there is a bit of passing pleasure. But very quickly, that passing pleasure changes and morphs into some form of dis-ease or pain. So that's the Praya. And we have free will, so we can choose the Praya, but we have to know that when we choose the Praya, we're going to experience some passing pleasure followed by pain. Now the Shreya it's not so pleasant initially, it's not so comfortable initially, it's not so attractive initially, not so familiar initially, but the Shreya is always in harmony with our own inner wisdom and will always lead us for our highest and greatest good. So the key to successful living is to base every thought, word, and action only on these Shreya thoughts. Shreya thoughts could be compassion and understanding and fearlessness, selflessness. And sometimes the Shreya thought of a jelly donut can also be very positive for us. We have a body and we have senses, and life is to be enjoyed. So it's possible that at, say, 7 o'clock after you concluded your dinner, that maybe a jelly donut or a nice little dessert actually should be experienced, and your inner wisdom will tell you so. And then 15 minutes later, after you finish the dessert, and perhaps your host or hostess asks you if you'd like another piece of the dessert, then your inner wisdom is going to say, perhaps, well, you just had it. You just had a piece. The second piece would be a prayer. And that's what we're being asked to sacrifice. And if we can listen to our inner wisdom, if we can exhibit the will force to serve the Shreya, that which is going to lead us for our highest and greatest good, and sacrifice the prayer, then we're always led for our highest and greatest good.
And and it's there too that people will discover the reality of what happiness and love is. For instance, we, especially here in America, really love to exalt, for instance, celebrities and athletes, into a status of high regard and respect. Just recently I was watching a wonderful documentary. It was called Slingshot. And this was about the gentleman who was the inventor of the Segway. And for those who may not know what a Segway is, it's that thing you stand on, you kind of turn the handle, it's got two wheels, and you roll around through the city. Okay? Mm-hmm. But this guy dedicated his life to pursuing curiosity, ever since he was a little kid. Mm-hmm. And then you begin to see, as his life unfolds through this curiosity, the many things that he comes to create. It seemed that he began to understand his life was to be in service of how to not only improve the lives of others, but the world in general. In fact, his biggest project now is finding a way to get everyone in the world clean water, because more than 50% of all diseases in the world occur from just really poor drinking water. Okay? Now, this guy took his collaboration so far, and I think it's still in the stages today, that he teamed up with the Coca-Cola Corporation because he realized one of the biggest obstacles to him being able to achieve his goal was that of distribution. He was able to build a machine that basically is a quick miniature distillation process, that from the point that you can put some of the nastiest water you've ever seen, I mean really bad stuff, and within minutes, at the other end, you put your cup in, and it's purely drinkable. I mean, this is something, and this is extreme, but that this machine can do. You could urinate, and literally this thing can process that into pure distillated drinking water. That's how effective this machine is. So now in teaming with Coca-Cola, they said, okay, we like what you're doing here. Maybe you can help us solve a problem. So now what you see today, and this is actually a direct result of his involvement with the company, is that you might go into a store and you see a Coca-Cola machine, but this time what you get to do is push buttons on a digital screen to decide which particular soft drink you want. It isn't like the 4 or 5 that you push the cup against the little lever and the Coke comes out. This one you can push any myriad of several digital buttons, boom, and right underneath you could put your cup and there you go. So that got to the point where they were saying, okay, how do we reduce the size of these machines to where we can put these in every village? And now we've got to, deal, of course, with the power situation, so forth and so on. But here's a guy that, followed exactly what you're talking about. Now, for the Segway, you might think, well, geez, that's a great invention. That seemed to be an overnight success. And one thing he kept iterating in this documentary is, Yeah, my overnight success is now, 21 years in the making. And that's the way we look at celebrities. It could be rock musicians. It could be, the guy that gets the Oscar. Where'd this person come from? And you hear, these things in the news about overnight success, and you realize, no. For instance, I'll give you a great example. We have Leonard Nimoy, affectionately known as Spock from the series Star Trek. People would be interested to know that until he landed that role on that television program back in the 1960s, which almost didn't make it past the pilot because nobody understood really what it was, is this was a man that spent 18 years of his life driving cabs, so forth and so on, before he could land a role that might pay him possibly a steady paycheck. Larry Hagman, who played J.R. Ewing in the hit TV series Dallas, was 52 years old before he even started receiving a steady paycheck that he could live on as an actor.
and Moses was 80 years old.
There you go. And you begin to realize
the Hebrew people from
right.
Pharaoh.
And you begin to realize all this, and that's why I sometimes really enjoy reading biographies or autobiographies. You realize there's no such thing as overnight success. And if there is, that's the same level as saying being hit in the same place twice in the same area by a bolt of lightning. That's how rare it actually is. Yeah. And you realize, but yet when you listen to these or read these biographies and think, well, if they're willing to do that, what in my life am I willing to do that's in earnest for myself to go in the direction that I know would bring me the most tremendous happiness? Because when that happens, addictions, I feel, just simply fall away because they could never, ever get you to a level of bliss that pursuing something that's earnestly yours could bring.
Well, that's why I continuously ask people, how happy do you really want to be? How healthy do you want to be? How secure do you really want to be? And the answer to that really is, how much are you willing to give up in order to receive what you really want? And it's interesting, our most precious gift as human beings is our breath. Breath is life and life is breath. And even though it is such a gift, the only way that we can receive that breath of life is to renounce it. In other words, we have to exhale in order to inhale. It's in giving that we receive. And so if I'm driving down the highway at, say, 55, 65 miles an hour, and some fellow who seems to be detached from reality is driving at an excessive rate of maybe 80, 85, 90 miles an hour, and he comes right in front of me, cuts me off. I have to slam on the brake to avoid an accident, and in that relationship, in the midst of that relationship, a little bubble is jarred from my unconscious mind and makes its way into my conscious mind, and I am aware of anger. Okay, what am I going to do with that anger? The more attention I give that anger, what's going to happen? Well, hormones are going to continue to surge through my entire physiology, poisoning me, depressing my immune system, and motivating me to do something irrational, something that's not in harmony with my inner wisdom. But anger, like fear and like greed, is just, it's what? It's energy. And what do we learn in 5th grade? Energy cannot be created, nor can it be destroyed, but it can be transformed. We know from our own personal experience that ice can be melted into water, and water can be heated into gas. Well, what yoga science and meditation teach us is that anger and fear and greed are not bad. They're stored in the unconscious mind, and in certain relationships, when they're triggered, these forces come forward. Why? Not so that we would serve them and turn ourselves into painful experiences as well as others, but rather to transform the energy. And it's the sacrifice of the fear, it's the sacrifice of the anger, it's the sacrifice of the selfish desires, so that my outer action reflects my inner wisdom, that acts as a mechanism to transform the debilitating and contractive power fear or greed. And if I can sacrifice it instead of serve it, the debilitating contractive power of the anger, the fear, and the selfish desire will be automatically transformed into strategic reserves of energy, willpower, and an expansion of my creative capacity. And I can use those resources in any relationship for a successful and a rewarding outcome. That's yoga science.
And it's shown in the experiments, too, about how they can actually determine people who will be successful in life versus people who I wouldn't say would be unsuccessful, but let's just say that their success might be mediocre to less than average. Yeah. And it was like through the cookie experiment. You know, I can give you one large cookie now, okay, and you can have that, or I can give you one small cookie with the promise that I'm going to give you another cookie in the next couple of hours or days. Mm-hmm. And those who were willing to forego that large cookie in the moment were those that had, were the ones that tended to later on in life find that they would be more successful because they understood that, not grabbing everything in the moment is really that healthy or that good for you, I guess, is the best way I can put it.
So the mind becomes habituated and often addicted to things that it likes and things that it doesn't like. That's the sort of part of the major role of the ego. The ego is always saying that if it looks or smells or tastes or sounds or feels pleasant, the ego says it's good. Do it. Mm-hmm. And yet, if whatever is the relationship in front of me, if it reprises a memory of pain rather than pleasure, the ego doesn't like it, wants to get rid of it. But we already know from our own personal experience that which is pleasurable isn't always good for us. And that which is uncomfortable and unpleasant, what the ego would say would be bad, isn't always bad for us. So if I am locked in, if my mind is locked in to only serving what it likes and disregarding and distancing myself from what I don't like, that creates a tremendous amount of mental inflexibility. And that mental inflexibility closes me off to new creative ideas that could help me fulfill the purpose of my life, and it also, that mental inflexibility creates physical inflexibility that disallows my body's organs to assimilate the energy that I receive through breath and through food and sunlight. So we need mental flexibility in order to be physically flexible. That's what a meditation practice does for us.
I know stillness, too, as you talk about as well as meditation. People, well, I've heard about this meditation thing, and it sounds good, but I sit down and I do this, and, well, and I remember when I first started with the pursuit and the light practice in my 20s of Zen and Zen Buddhism. Uh-huh. And, you read all these wonderful mystical stories about the experiences people have, and I think a lot of people in the Western world thought probably also pursued the Eastern philosophies with the same romantic notion. Now, for me, that wasn't what happened. It was all of a sudden Zen popped into my head, and I thought, well, that's curious. So I began to pursue it. Mm-hmm. And in my voracious appetite for reading about this, I also came along to have a mentor who was very familiar. So it was someone that I could actually talk to about this pursuit that I had here. And he says,
Sure.
I'll tell you what. Here's the thing you need to come to understand. And this is something he finally said months and months later. He says, I love your pursuit. I'm all for supporting it. But as we talk, what I come to realize is something that I think you should finally need to know now. He says, you could come to learn about something until you know it so well that you could almost quote it verbatim to anybody who would listen. Mm-hmm. But until you put it into practice, till you actually use it, it'll just be nothing but intellectual head knowledge.
That's right.
What would you like to have?
That's right. That's right. That's
and meditation doesn't come quick, but you do feel immediate benefits. But the long-term benefits are tremendous, and a great example I keep using on the program when the opportunity arises is I had the opportunity to meet in person and to sit down and interview for an hour Sakyong Mipom Rinpoche, the son of Trungpa Rinpoche, who's always quoted in a lot of works as I was growing up back in those times before I got into broadcasting. Now, he's the one that set up the Shambhala Buddhist meditation centers, and there's actually one located in the city that I live in Portland, Oregon. Now, I remember going out to the lobby to receive this gentleman as my guest, and as I was out there in the radio station lobby, very big lobby, by the way, you could feel in the air, and I literally mean this physically, you could feel in the air the most tremendous sense of calm that you could imagine feeling. It's almost hard to describe, but the best way I like to put it in a metaphor is we could have been side by side in a battlefield with bombs dropping in chaos, even near us, next to us, in front of us, behind us. And the feeling of calm was, A, everything's going to be okay, and that we would probably walk through this battle-torn field without a scratch on us. That would probably be what the long-term benefits of meditation would possibly bring someone. And that was just an amazing feeling.
Well, you're referencing stillness, which is the divine physician. And interestingly, all the martial arts begin with an experience of a still point within us. And to be able to access that stillness within us is one of the major purposes of meditation. So meditation provides many skills and tools for us in the process of experiencing stillness. First of all, we learn one-pointed attention, which flies in the face of our culture, which is encouraging us to multitask, which there's not one human being on the planet that would agree that it's possible to multitask. No medical professional, no engineer, no scientist, because it's impossible for the mind and the brain to multitask. In order to provide us the delusion that we're multitasking, adrenaline has to be surging through the body so that the mind will go quickly, very quickly, back and forth between two objects. The ego concludes, oh, this must be multitasking. But it's not. The key to successful living truly is monotasking, or one-pointed attention. If we can bring all of our attention to one point, to the exclusion of all these other thoughts, desires, emotions, and concepts, the human being, unlike any other animal, can access what is referred to as the superconscious portion of the mind, where an infinite library of wisdom exists. This is not a metaphor. The superconscious portion of the mind is beyond the conscious. It's beyond the unconscious. It's the same portion of the mind where Paul McCartney hears beautiful melodies and Albert Einstein saw mathematical equations. Doesn't mean that I'm going to become a songwriter, and Daniel, you're not necessarily going to become a physicist. But the more that we can practice meditation and cultivate the skill of one-pointed attention, monotasking, giving all of our creative energy to one object to the exclusion of everything else, we too can access that superconscious portion of the mind to know what is the thought to think, what is the word to speak, and what is the action to take. That's going to lead us for our highest and greatest good.
I was going to say, and how often we hear stories of people, whether it's something you read or something you hear about, where they follow this path, and you'll consistently hear them say, as well as the people who view or experience this person taking these steps or moving in that direction, it just didn't seem to make any sense at the time. I couldn't figure it out, but I just knew somehow I was supposed to move in this direction or take this action, no matter how crazy it seems. And I think that's why that movie, The Field of Dreams, had such a big appeal. You know, here was something, he was whispered a voice to tell him to build this baseball field. At first he didn't know what was it I was supposed to build, then he builds this. And then in the end, at the ultimate moment of what seemed to be a tremendous amount of personal sacrifice, everybody's telling him to cash in. And and that would seem like the reasonable thing to do. Now, I would like to, because I think the listeners would be intrigued to know this about this book, The Heart and Science of Yoga, is you do a wonderful job of interweaving stories from the Bible. Most people would think, well, yoga isn't that an Eastern thing? Well, certainly, but the applications, and the more, that I get this wonderful opportunity with guests like you, where they expose the Bible in ways for what I think it really is, which is lessons on good, right living, on how you really serve. And I like that wonderful story about Abraham and Isaac that I think touches on this very, very wonderfully. Why don't you go ahead and share that a bit with our listeners?
Okay, well...
Since we're talking about that idea of what Kevin Costner went through.
Yes. Well, Abraham was a very interesting historical figure. He was a yoga scientist, as were all the great figures in all religions. They were all essentially yoga scientists. The churchianity or the religion came later, but Abraham, more than anything else in his life, wanted to find union with the supreme reality. We refer to that as God. And he prayed. He tried to live a wonderful life. But he did harbor a desire, and the desire was for a son. And rumor has it through the Old Testament that Sarah, his wife, conceived Isaac, their son, when she was close to 100 years of age. I'm not sure about the numbers on this situation, how accurate that is, but they were both in the late afternoon of life. Let's put it that way. When Isaac was conceived and born, and Abraham loved Isaac tremendously and gave an awful lot of attention. And at a certain point, as the story goes, God knocks on Abraham's door and says, "I see that you love your son very much." "Oh yes, I do, but I love you, God." And so the Lord says to Abraham, "Well, are you willing to give up your son?" "Well, what do you mean?" Abraham says, "Give up my son. Boy, I've been waiting my whole life for this." Well, God said, "Well, are you willing to take the life of your son?" This was this was a very powerful teaching for Abraham. He knew that he couldn't just out of hand give away and reject this teaching. So he had to sit with it. He had to contemplate it. And at a certain point, he realized that he had to do this. Had to serve the Lord, because more than anything, he wanted to find union with the Lord. And so Abraham took the boy, brought him up on the hill, tied him down, got a knife, raised it up, and as soon as Abraham committed himself, as soon as the hand and the arm came down, aimed at Isaac's throat, that's where the angel of the Lord stopped him, took hold of his hand, and disallowed Abraham from taking the life. And the teaching here is that the supreme reality, God was not really asking Abraham to take the life of his son. It's a lesson about attachment. What God really wanted was Abraham's attachment for the son, not his love. And there is a difference, and we need to examine that in all of our relationships, because attachment is what inhibits our love, because it's really a superimposition of the ego. We say, "I love you." Very often, it's actually a legal contract. In other words, when I meet somebody new that I fall in love with, that I care for very much, what I do is I take out a little pencil and a piece of paper, and I do a very quick little caricature of who this person is. because I want to remember this person because I love this person. I like this person very much. Really what I'm doing is I'm creating a little caricature of everything that this person is doing right now that makes me happy. Every time I have another encounter and another encounter with this person, I take out this caricature to make sure that this person is conforming to my caricature of them. And if they're not conforming, well, then it's almost like they're breaking the contract. I can't love you any longer because you're not making me happy. Well, that's not love, you see. That's an attachment to a superimposition that I had and an expectation, which was all based on fallacy. And so that's the teaching of Abraham and Isaac is not to give up stuff just to give up stuff. The problem is not the jelly donut. The problem is my attachment to the jelly donut. Why do I keep on buying these boxes of donuts and bringing them into the house? You know, if I'm out someplace and I want to have a little dessert, that's fine. But to feel such a sense of lack that I have to put boxes and boxes of these donuts in my pantry so that whenever I get frustrated or where there's some kind of inner conflict that I don't want to deal with, I can go to get a jelly donut and have a little passing pleasure. But the problem is it's a prey, and it's ultimately going to morph into some form of dis-ease or pain. So attachment is the problem. That's the point. There's no problem with the things of the material world. It's our attachment. It's just like the things of the world are not the problem. It's what we think about the things. That's the problem.
Right. Yeah, and I was going to point out, too, as you brought up the jelly donut scenarios, that corporations have become very adept at being able to, let's just say, manipulate human behavior.
That's right.
And I'm sure that a lot of people out there listening, now nobody manipulates what I do, and I say, okay, well, how many times do you feel that you stop at a drive-through each week? And I said a week. Some people stop through them every day.
Yes.
And do you specifically stop at a drive-through to pick up food because you're really hungry?
That's right.
And I would have to fathom a guess that probably close to at least 80 or more percent, and these are just crazy percentages, not drawn from any actual pool, but that most people, if they really inquired about this, would realize, no, I'm not really hungry, then what is it that you're doing? Well, think about what a drive-through is. You're out driving. Driving takes a lot of what would be known as beta state concentration, and that takes a lot of energy out of the body.
That's right.
Which could give you the illusion that you're hungry, okay? And the reason that you're hungry is because somehow in your lifetime, and people may find this a stretch, but I don't find it that much of a stretch at all because of the consistency of people who lose weight realizing I actually eat because somehow it's helped me to relieve an anxiety and stress. And when you're out there driving, especially if you're in a city, there is a lot of anxiety and a lot of stress that occurs that you may be able to manage through habit, but it's there anyway. You go to that drive-thru, you grab that food, and for a moment you're feeling better. But then unfortunately you're also taking in processed food, which an hour later with all the sugars and salts are going to make you feel hungry again. This is what these people are counting on, is that you will be as we're being labeled, consumer.
That's right. That's right. That's right. That's why, Daniel, that's why at this time in my life, I don't eat food that I love. I eat food that loves me,
Right.
that loves my liver, that loves my spleen, that loves my eyes, my heart, my lungs. It's a different perspective, and when you change your perspective, you change your experience. And that's what meditation helps us to do. It helps us to change our perspective. Right now, our concepts, our unconscious concepts, many of which are invalid, they skew our perception of the world. It's like walking in front of one of those funny mirrors at the carnival. Makes you look like you weigh 500 pounds. That image in mind, you conclude, I have to go on a diet. So the point is that we have faulty lenses. Consciousness is looking through faulty lenses and seeing things that are not real. It's like looking out at the horizon line of a desert and thinking that the water that I see at the horizon line is going to save my life. So it's just a mirage.
Exactly. In fact, just a couple of days ago, I interviewed with a guest who's going to be doing a workshop in Oregon, and he's doing it on what is known as the Headless Way. Now, it was funny because back in the late 1980s, as I was pursuing my spiritual way, if you will, I remember that, again, voraciously, I was pulling every book I could get my hands on that even had or even suggested the word Zen or Zen Buddhism. And one of them was a book called On Having No Head. And it was funny because I was starting to read this book and I thought, okay, this is somebody who basically kind of captured the Asian philosophy and turned it into this, and you see that, sort of what I like to call the guru flavor of the month.
Yep.
But what it turned out to be, now here it is, I just interviewed, so I didn't think much about the book since that time. And here I'm interviewing this person on the Headless Way, and what he suggested is, why don't you go to YouTube and look up the documentary on this? And it was about one Robert Harding. Are you familiar with this gentleman?
No, I am not.
Okay. So he says, basically the Headless Way is this. He says, let's take a look at ourselves. Okay, we believe we know who we are. But the fact is we don't, but we can come to know who we truly are. The fact is, and this, what made this whole thing strange to me in a wonderful, eerie way is, as a kid, I actually had these same thoughts. When I look in the mirror and I see myself, is that what I really look like? Because you really can't look back at yourself. You point your fingers at your head, and what are you actually pointing at? But as he was claiming, nothing, okay? Now, you can look down at your hands and you can see them. You can see you have a body. You can see the outside world around you, but where your head is basically empty space. But he also applied this at a scientific worldview as well. So he says, okay, so for instance, here you are. Now let's pull back a little bit more, and now pretty soon you're part of the landscape that you live in. You pull back a little bit more, and now you're part of that landscape that's part of the state of the country you live in, and you keep pulling back. Now you're part of the Earth and the solar system and the galaxy. And then let's go ahead and let's move back toward you now. Now let's go beneath you, and now you're a construct of cells and atoms and empty space. And the whole idea was to get to the essence of who you truly are. And, at the time, he was probably considered a little bit off, but people began to realize, wow, this is a way of seeing who I truly am. And it was pretty amazing, when you think of the liberation that can come from something like that. And he actually has, experiments and exercises that you do. He passed in 2006, I believe it was. But into his 90s, he was talking about, look, I'm trying to show the world that we're pure love. That's what we are. That's what we were meant to do here. And when you can come to that point of knowing who you truly are, life truly does get a lot easier. And I can see in yoga science, it's really the same thing.
Yes, it is, yes. So I read a statistic years ago that was very inspiring, and it was something to the effect that if you could take out all the space that is within your body, all the space that comprises your body, everything that was left could fit into a peanut shell.
Wow.
So a sage from the last century, Nisargadatta Maharaj, says, when I know that I am nothing, that when I know that I am everything, that is love. Between those 2 points, I live my life.
Now, something I'd like to bring up, because just yesterday I was doing a program on leadership. And what you tend to hear a lot is when you start a company or your own business, you need a mission statement, a reason that drives you forward with what causes you to get up each day and put this business forward, why you or how you serve. And in this particular book, it was funny how the authors had actually shown how after time they start losing touch with the reality of what their mission is. And they gave examples, for instance, like Apple Computer or Avon.
Sure.
And what it was, as they said, for instance, in Avon's case, their mission statement went on for about 10 pages. And as you were reading even just excerpts of theirs or Apple's mission statement, it left you scratching your head like, what the heck did these guys just tell me their mission statement was? I don't get it, you know. Now, and the science of yoga is that you talk about a mantra, which can seem kind of similar, but I think it's more in line with something other than a mission statement, although there might be some similarities. And I know that in Japan with the samurai, they have what is known as a bushido. And these are very different things when it comes to mantra, bushido versus mission, but they can seem similar. Let's talk about what that is and how important it is for a person to have a mantra.
Well, your mantra really becomes your best friend if you use it. Your best friend. Because a mantra does four things. Now, when we talk about a mantra, it's a word or a series of words containing the name of the Supreme Reality. We call that God. And every tradition, every spiritual, every religious tradition has mantras. And they all have four things in common. Every mantra does four things. First of all, it generates love. Second, it generates fearlessness. Third, it generates strength. Every time you listen to this, what I call a perfect harmonic, it washes over our entire mind-body-sense complex, this aggregate harmonic that also contains ignorance, it contains fear, it contains anger, it contains selfish desires. And the more that you give your attention to this perfect harmonic of the mantra, it motivates you to let go of the imperfection that is part of this mind-body-sense complex. So the first three things that every mantra does, it generates love and fearlessness and strength. And the fourth thing that is common with all mantras, just like salmon that swim upstream and just like pigeons that fly home to roost, mantras return to their source of origin. It just so happens that there's only one source of everything. That is the definition of God. So the mantra, actually, if you listen, the mantra comes from unknown. It comes from the silence. And when you hear it, begin to observe that the mantra returns to the silence. Well, that silence is the ocean of peace, bliss, and happiness. It is an ocean of consciousness. And when the mind is one-pointed on the mantra in deep meditation, the mantra will return to its origin, which is eternal consciousness, wisdom, and bliss, fullness. Mind will piggyback a ride and experience the truth of our own divinity. And what that does for the individual, we begin slowly to annihilate the space between me and everything that I can perceive through my brain and senses. So it's the beginning of the end of duality, where I'm the subject and everything that I perceive is the object. And when there is no other, when there is no two, and there's only one, what is there to fear? Whom is there to fear if there's only one? Recognizing that, Jesus, speaking as the Christ, says, love thy neighbor as thyself. Not because it's such a cool idea, which it is, but because on the highest level of the consciousness, Jesus, speaking as the Christ, knew that even though your neighbor has a different body, different mind, different personality, different set of habit patterns, all of those change. They're constantly changing. Yet within your neighbor and within yourself, there is only one consciousness, which is part of an ocean of consciousness. Christians in the early days called it the Christ. Muslims refer to it as Allah. Hindus refer to it as Brahman, or the Atman within. Great spirit from the Native American cultures. Doesn't matter what you call it, but the point is that there's only one reality.
Right.
And if there is only one reality, it's the beginning of the end.
Mm-hmm. And when you think about, too, the idea of conflict, especially when you look at this last presidential election, you think, oh, my goodness, boy, everybody's stuff was coming up on this.
Yes.
But another person that comes to mind was the Chinese general Sun Tzu.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember when I first read this particular piece of wisdom that he shared, I sort of got it, but I really didn't. And then years later, I finally went, oh, now I see what he's talking about. And that is, to know your enemy is to know yourself. Right. You will fight many battles in your lifetime without any imminent danger. Mm-hmm. And I realized, wow, the wisdom of that. Most of the battles that we fight out there are usually battles with ourselves.
And most of the times we capitulate and we don't really engage in the battle.
Right.
We don't
exactly.
really engage, and so we enable the enemy day in, day out.
There's so much we can cover here, but it's been a true pleasure to have you here on the program again. The book is The Heart.
This has been a marvelous conversation. I just love it.
Yeah, it'd be kind of fun to do this again, and maybe talk about some exercises, practical things such as breathing and stillness and meditation,
sure.
things like that, which you do have in your book. The book is The Heart and Science of Yoga. Our guest tonight, Leonard Perlmutter. Leonard, is there a website people can find out more about your work and how they can get the book?
Sure. The website is americanmeditation.org, americanmeditation.org. In 1996, I founded the American Meditation Institute, and the website is americanmeditation.org, and you can get the book, The Heart and Science of Yoga, there. We have online video courses. We have other courses online of the Bhagavad Gita and yoga psychology. This Saturday on the 6th, we'll be doing a seminar on the Compassionate Buddha. So, and those are always in the archives that folks can access. So, AmericanMeditation.org seems to be the portal for my life's work, and if anybody's interested, please join us there.
Well, I think they will be. Leonard, thank you so much for joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program.
Thank you for a very enjoyable afternoon, Daniel.
You betcha.
God bless you.
We want to thank you, the listeners out there, for joining us. Go ahead and follow your mantra and go to beyond50radio.com. That is the number 50. We do encourage you. Sign up for our weekly e-newsletter and keep up to date with what's going on in Beyond 50 as well as our upcoming programs. Also follow us on Twitter at Beyond 50 Radio as well. I'm Daniel Davis. Thank you for tuning in. This is the Beyond 50 radio program, and remember, live your day past halfway.